Okay, so today's tomato review is going to be on the Tiny Tim tomato. And this tomato is a really good tomato for growing indoors. I've been fooling around with different things with this tomato, and one of the things that I found with this tomato is that if you grow it in small pots, it'll stay really small, basically. It won't get much bigger than the pot will allow it to get. So if you grow it in a really small pot, maybe something, the size of my fist, I can't put you on there. If I put it in a pot the size of my fist, the plant's only going to get about 6 to 8 inches tall. But if you put it in a pot that's a 1 or 2 gallon pot, that thing's going to get pretty big. It's going to get big enough. But this is considered a dwarf tomato or a bush tomato, meaning that dwarf tomatoes generally don't get too much bigger than about 30 inches or so. They might get to 36 inches on really good conditions, but for the most part, dwarf tomatoes stay really small and really compact, and they really produce very heavily. And so I'm going to be bringing some of these dwarf tomatoes in, and I may even start some dwarf tomatoes from seed indoors away from the blight, because once they get blight, it's just a real headache to deal with indoors. But yeah, this is considered a bush tomato or a dwarf tomato. And then you also have micro dwarf tomatoes, which are supposed to be even smaller of plants than this. Those plants, even in the best case scenario, micro dwarf tomatoes don't usually get much bigger than 12 inches. So they stay really small and they really get compact. So this is it. Let me show you what it looks like. Back you out a little bit here. Okay, that's what it looks like. It's just a regular cherry tomato. Okay, nothing special about the shape or anything like that. And here's what the inside looks like. Hopefully that's showing up on the camera. Okay, that's what it looks like on the inside, regular tomato. And let's do a bricks. It's not super high or anything like that. It's like 6 on the bricks, which is okay, I guess, for this year. But this is a dwarf tomato. I mean, this is a cherry tomato, and so cherry tomatoes should be higher. They should be between 8 and 10. 8 at like a minimum, really. And so it's not surprising to me that this particular tomato variety is low in sweetness. I've heard a lot of people complain about that. They bought this tomato thinking to going to get nice sweet cherry tomatoes, and a lot of people had indicated that their cherry tomatoes that came off the Tiny Tim were not very sweet, and they were kind of on the bitter and tangy side. And that's kind of my experience as well. But nonetheless, even that tomato is still better than what you're going to get in the store. What you're going to get in the store is usually going to be tasteless, except for maybe the cherry tomatoes. They're usually pretty good, but some of them cherry tomatoes are sprayed with stuff so they don't rot in the store, and they're not always exactly good for you. So I'd still rather grow my cherry tomatoes like this if I can, without having to take in the extra chemicals that they put on it so it doesn't rot. But let's give it a go. Let's see what it tastes like, and let me give you my opinion. That particular one was very tangy, extremely tangy. And it's not just the soil. I've grown this in a couple of different soils. Some of the plants are outdoors, some of the plants are indoors in a greenhouse. And I grew them all over the place, all different kinds of conditions, and I'm still getting the same result. And that confirms what other people had been saying about the tomato being not tasteless, but very tangy. The tomato tends to be a lot tangier than it probably should be. I'll try one more for you guys. Alright, so let's give that a go. That one had a little bit of sweetness on it. That one actually wasn't bad. Though the tangy part was still higher. If I was to put a number on the sweetness, I'd probably say the sweetness was around 18 to 20, which is generally pretty low. and the tangy part was probably like 33 to 35. It was pretty high in the tangy, so the offset is really big. But this particular one had some sweetness on it, and so I can give it a little bit of a rating now. Before, the other tomato had virtually no sweetness and all tang. The texture is very nice and consistent. It's not very chalky. It's got a nice chewy effect to it. It has a pretty nice tomatoey aftertaste to it, which is also nice. That's a very nice thing. So, I mean, it's generally not a bad tomato to grow, bean. It's a dwarf variety. You can grow it indoors in your kitchen. So, I mean, with that said, I mean, at least it's worth trying. If you don't like the Tiny Tim, you could try another dwarf tomato. But this is at least one you know about and you can potentially grow and get a pretty good harvest. This plant is a pretty good yielder. I do get pretty good yields off of this plant. Now, I'm not sure if it's a determinate or a semi-determinate, because some of the plants that I got grown in the greenhouse, I started last year in October. And they're still growing out there, putting out tons of tomatoes right now. So I can't really say if it's a determinate or a semi-determinate. I would imagine it's probably a semi-determinate, mainly because it's still alive. And every time I trim it back, new branches come up on it. Whereas a determinate tomato, when that thing puts out its tomatoes, it's pretty much game over for it. It just starts dying. The whole plant just dies off. So this one doesn't. I cut it back and now it's putting out new shoots and it's starting to grow again. So I would call it a semi-determinate, though a lot of websites are calling it a determinate tomato. I disagree with that. I think it's a semi-determinate or an indeterminate. So it's either one of the two. I will check around just to confirm, that it's not a determinate, or maybe it is a determinate. I'll put whatever it is labeled as on the internet in general. But my opinion is that it's a semi-determinate. So anyway, that's really about it. I mean, there's not much I can say about the tomato here. I'll give you another last look at it. A little handful of them. Alright, so that's your last look at them. That's about it. That was your tomato review for the Tiny Tim tomato. If you have any questions, just comment below. I'll do my best to answer them. I'll have seeds for this later on this year. Maybe by October, there'll be seeds up on the website for this particular variety. So make sure you stop in there and check my inventory. So that's about it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you on the next one.